Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. And opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. I'm grateful to all of you for we have exceeded all our targets of viewership today. And without you, it won't be possible. So keep on reading my books and sharing it widely. And don't call history from Vedas and Mahabharata as mythology. It is Sattology. So I have a very special guest today, and he is very popular on the Indian TV shows all over the world, anyone who watches them. He is practically on every single panel, and his views are highly respected. So let us welcome Major General Dhruv Katoch. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So one question really comes in the geostrategic. The G20 is happening right now. And the Indian Prime Minister's statement in the beginning of when he addressed the foreign ministers, and he said that the multilateralism has literally not existed at all in the whole world since 1945. So with that, we start that how geostrategic aspects of the world policy dominated by the West through institutions has actually curtailed the world commerce till this date.
Thank you. As the anchor, you said that you're not wearing black. I'm putting on black in view. So let me start with that, right? No, this is simply to match with the shirt. There's no other implication. No, you see, the Prime Minister made a very focused appeal for peace because it was important in this G20, in the foreign ministers meet which had just concluded, and the Prime Minister spoke. It is important to get all the FMs of these 20 countries to speak in one common voice, and to have to give out a press briefing to say that all of us are at least congruent on this point. We could not do that because there was disagreement. Now, the Prime Minister mentioned, a few facets as far as why multilateralism has failed. Especially, he says, that the on the nuclear field it has not failed, and on many other fields, what we wanted to do has not been done. So, but again, he made a special appeal for peace. Now, it's quite strange, that a very large number of my friends from the Western world, from the US and from Europe, in my interactions with them, they asked me specifically, why is India not on the side of the West? And they say that we are the moral side and the other side is the immoral side. Now, I think this moral argument, I think, is a bit weak. I've always thought it was a bit weak, especially coming from people who have gone into wage wars successively over the last, say, if you take the period from 1950 onwards till date, you see the conflicts around the world, and where has been the concept of morality? And especially, I get very perturbed about morality because on our own neighborhood, when at that point of time, East Pakistan, a genocide was being committed there, an absolute genocide where millions were killed and millions of women were raped. Now, in that genocide, the West not only was silent, they actually supported the killers. So this moral argument I thought was a bit weak. But leaving that aside, I think it is important for your viewers really to get an idea as to a few aspects of India's foreign policy and the changes which have come in this foreign policy over the last 8 years or 9 years with the coming in of Prime Minister Modi as the Prime Minister. Now, the first thing which happened was that we had Sushma Swaraj as the External Affairs Minister, and both she and the Prime Minister, they steered India's foreign policy in a particular way. If you speak to any of our ambassadors, for any people from the diplomatic community, they will tell you that India's foreign policy has shown a continuum right since independence. That is true. Even now, that element of that continuum remains. But the thrust areas have changed. And I think the major change in the thrust area, there are two aspects I'll talk about only here, which will amplify what I'm trying to say. One, we have dehyphenated our foreign policy. It is a very important thing which I'm stating. I will explain that in a little bit. And the second is, today when we talk of India's foreign policy, the centrality of India's foreign policy is India's national interest. Earlier, we were kowtowing to one or the other blocks. So either we were moving with the Russians or we were moving with the Americans. I won't say Russians, I will say the Soviet Union, or we were moving with the Americans at various points of time. But we were never moving with India. And I think that change has come about because now people tell me which side are you following? And my response to them is, today, India is following India's policy. And I think that is a major shift. We're not going to be aligned with any other powers. We are going to be aligned with India. On the dehyphenation business, earlier, let us say if Indian foreign minister had to visit Israel, it was mandatory for him to also visit Palestine. So, just to balance it out. Now, it is no longer true. Today, when we visit, if the Prime Minister visits Israel, it will be a standalone visit. He'll visit Israel, talk to them, the Israeli Premier may come here, but it is separate. And then somebody may go and visit Palestine, and that is a separate visit altogether. We have ceased to hyphenate countries together. Now, this is something which needs to be understood because our interests are universal now. We have interest with the Western world and we have interest with other countries outside the Western world. And these interests I will put into a very simple block, into two very simple blocks. One is India's maritime concerns and the second is India's concerns on the continental shelf. So when we look at India's maritime concerns, it aligns completely with what the United States is doing. We are very firmly for free and open navigation, and we don't like the bullying tactics of China or any other country in the South China Sea. So the Quad. So that is where the Quad comes in, and India is part of the 4-member Quad, and we are very keen to make it a stronger and stronger bloc and have additional members coming in at a later stage, especially from the ASEAN countries. So this is one aspect of the strategy. But when we are looking at India's interest on the continental shelf, our interests do not align in the same manner as what the US would like. For example, we have got totally different interests as far as Afghanistan and Pakistan is concerned. For us, Pakistan has always been a state which has been a bed of terrorism, right? And it is something which we will not accept. So when we are looking at US policies in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Pakistan, etc., well, I'm not saying that we are opposed to those policies. The US is free to follow any policy they want, but many of those policies do not align with what India wants. And so we have a different set of policies which are more aligned with India's interests. And that is why when you look at the Ukraine war, India has got a different set of interests. So when people told me that why is India buying oil from Russia just simply because you're getting it cheap, and they're trying to throw the moral argument at me, my counter to them is, why is Europe buying that oil? You see, it is okay for NATO to do so. It is okay for European countries to do so. It is okay for even Ukraine to do so. So why is it not okay for India to do so? There was that element of hypocrisy that the whole world should actually come and follow the European interests. But this is Europe's war. The Ukraine war, the way I have looked at it is a tribal war taking place between the white community in Europe, between the white Christian community, and between two countries. Both of them have the same concept of Christianity. So as far as I'm concerned, that war is not of direct interest to me. And there is no reason for India to get involved in that war, except to state that we would like to have peace there. So I see no reason why India should take sides in a war of that nature. But the way our self-interest goes, India's national interest goes, we desperately require energy at a cheaper rate. We do not want the energy prices to get hijacked by Europe buying all their energy from the Middle East and West, or rather from West Asia and other countries, jacking up the prices because nobody is buying Russian oil. So that is not something which conforms to India's interest, which is why India made a very, very firm statement. We will look at India's interest first, right? We want peace. This is not, as the Prime Minister very clearly said, this is not an era for war, but we have our interests and we will follow our interests. Aditya.
So the era of war comment, I have commented on it many times. I said in Kali Yuga is the era of war. Kali Yuga, you cannot avoid. It's the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. Like, it's,
Yes, Kali Yuga is the era of war. That's a fair one. Hmm?
so if
In
somebody
fact,
says, yeah,
I will actually use that now. It is plagiarism, but I'm telling you, I'll plagiarize your statement. Okay.
because our scriptures say very clearly, Kali Yuga is the era of quarrel and hypocrisy. And we see that. So if somebody is hypocritical and quarrelsome, then you should say, oh, it is Kali Yuga. Thank you. So you are just
Yes.
behaving as as normal right now. So now you did a very strong opening lines, and viewers, I can tell you, you must see him in other TV shows and other places also, and search him out on Google as well. His name is there. You can search it out. Now, one question comes in the mind: G20 foreign ministers meeting, and it is a watershed moment for Indian diplomacy as well as for the world. This is the first time two Asian countries have in sequence, they have led the G20 grouping, Indonesia and now India. And we all know that Indonesia and India are friendly countries in many ways, culturally as well as diplomatically. So, what impact or what is going on in the mind of the Western leaders who try to hijack this meeting over the Ukraine Russian war or NATO Russian war?
You see, I would like to use the word which has been frequently used now and which India is using time and time again. The word is really the global south. Now, what has happened is, earlier we had the G7, and the G7 was a very powerful economic entity as a grouping. And with the economy, with the shift in the economic balance now coming from the Atlantic onto the Indo-Pacific, that was the time when they realized that, okay, the world's economy is actually shifting onto a different plane. There are different actors in play. And so the G20 came in. And the G20 controls, I think, about 85 or 90% of the world's, just these 20 countries account for about 85 to 90% of the world's trade and wealth, etc., etc. But earlier, what used to happen, the global south really was left out of the decision-making process. And now, I think what has happened with Indonesia being there, with India being there now, and then I think it is going to Brazil next year, we have a continuum where the concerns of the global south, I think, can be met. That, okay, we understand there are concerns of the West. Europe has got their concerns. America has got their concerns. But there are other major groupings in the world. They have their concerns too. And so when we talk of making rules and regulations pertaining to finance, economy, terrorism, various things which we talk about, all of them have an impact on the economic health of a nation. So the concerns of the global south cannot be left out. Now, this is something which is getting highlighted. However, we could not get to a joint statement as far as the particular finance ministers conference was concerned, because specifically the Western democracies, they wanted a mention of the Russian-Ukraine war, and they wanted a condemnation, I think, of it. Now, that is something which India was certainly not going to agree. And as China was also part of the system, even China wouldn't have agreed to that, to say that we condemn Russia for this war. Nobody's supporting the Russians, but at the same time, nobody is also supporting the factors which led to the war in Ukraine. So that is why a sort of a stalemate a stalemate came about, which was the reason why when the Prime Minister spoke about it, he said, listen, we can leave those issues aside. Let us at least work towards some common agenda points, certain minimum common points which we can all agree. But the West made it contingent on Ukraine, and that is where that joint statement could not come about. Now, having said that, I think there were still a few positives which have come about. One, a meeting did take place between the Russian foreign minister and the US Secretary of State. Now, I think that was it was only about 10 to 15 minutes, but at least it was a one-to-one. And to that extent, I think, okay, while we may not come to an agreement as far as a joint statement is concerned, but can we at least break the ice? Can we at least start talking and see which way the world is going to go? Because ultimately, if this war continues for another year and another year and another year, the countries which will suffer, in my view, Europe is going to suffer, but the global south is going to suffer very, very badly, especially the poorer countries in Asia and in Africa. They are going to face a very severe impact of this war, especially in terms of energy prices and food prices. India is insulated to a very large extent as far as this is concerned. I mean, I'll be very blunt about it. We are fortunate we have a government which is stable, which is strong, and which actually looks at India's national interest and not at the survival of the party. It is something which people really don't understand. But we have a government in place which is really looking at India's national interest and how to look after the poorest of the poor. So we will get through it. But I think it is not something which is good for the world. This war is not good for the world, period. It is going to be disastrous for Europe. And I hope the sooner Europe realizes it and tell Ukraine to stop, right? I'm afraid Ukraine is going to be the loser in this war in the long term. They've already lost a portion of the country in the east. More importantly, they've had half the country destroyed. Now, that is not something, I feel very sorry when I see those visuals. There's one point of Ukraine which I just want to make, Let us compare Ukraine to the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, on our northern borders. It is 1/3 the population. But if you're looking at agricultural wealth, I think Ukraine can feed the whole world. And now that country is stuck in war. We are going to destroy a very major portion of the world's food supply if this war continues. Ultimately, it's going to have a very, very serious impact on food prices and on energy prices. So the worst sufferers, many countries are going to go down. It will only result in a great deal of economic misery to millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people across the globe. And I think Europe cannot be isolated from that. So it is in everybody's interest. I'm not saying to resolve the issue, at least to stop the war, stop fighting, start talking, and then we'll see where we can take it from here. Sanctions, I don't think is the answer. They have not worked earlier, and I don't think they're going to work in future. So can we have a different model? That is something which I think the G20 presidency of India, over the next 1 year, we will be trying to work towards it. I would also like to make a statement here, though I'm not I'm not part of the power brokers in Delhi, right? I'm nowhere in the government. But I would like to make one statement here from my own analysis. And that statement is, India is not going to be a peace broker. We'll be a peace facilitator. But we are not going to be occupying the chair and saying, okay, you do this and you do that. I think what India would like to do is to facilitate people to get together and talk. Can the US talk with Russia? Can the US talk with, or can the Ukrainian president and the American president get together and talk with President Putin or something like that? Agree on a ceasefire first. Let it hold for 3 months to 6 months. Then see as to where we can go forward. Otherwise, I'm afraid it's going to carry on. And if it carries on, I'm afraid Russia holds all the trumps as of now.
The very famous author, very famous in India, Professor Kusumlata Kedia, comes on our show a lot. And she was branded as one of the top European scholars, even though she's Indian origin, but she was branded as top European scholars in the past. Now, one of the things that she said, that the West doesn't know how to rule. And they don't know how to rule, and they need an enemy to survive. Whether it's Iraq, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's somebody where they all unite together. And that is, we are seeing that Russia was their oldest enemy, even though they won the World War II together. So do you think that this kind of mindset of one-upmanship and military-based force rule, the rules-based order is basically the Western rules-based order, which is what they're defending through the various institutions. So do you think that that mindset is a problem for the world peace?
I think ultimately it is that mindset, really. The statements which have emanated from the senior leadership, the political leadership in the United States is that Russia must be subjected to a strategic defeat. I'm not exaggerating. They are the exact words which have been used by people in power in the United States, that Russia must be subjected to a strategic defeat. Now, I have got very serious issues with a statement of this nature because, in my view, if Russia suffers a strategic defeat, then they may use an option which is totally unacceptable to me as an Indian, and I think to everybody across the globe. They may actually get onto the nuclear option. As of now, I don't see that threat. But if Russia is going to suffer a strategic defeat, well, who knows? Who knows which way Russia will move? That is danger. And I think if you start looking at it from that prism, I think the United States is going to be very seriously impacted, and so will Europe be. The whole world is going to be very seriously impacted. Who will survive? I mean, of course, humanity will continue to scrape through, etc., etc. But all that we have built up over the last 200-300 years, a very major portion of that is going to be destroyed, and rebuilding it may take another 1,000 years. So it is something which is not a good option at all. This is a mindset of the United States and of Europe today, of the NATO alliance. That okay, they must suffer a defeat, but why should they suffer a defeat? When the Soviet Union collapsed, that was the perfect time for peace. I mean, you could have disbanded NATO, put Russia into the economic union, and it would have been a different world altogether. But if you have a different world altogether, then what happens to the arms industry? You see, that arms industry is the one which is really dictating policies across the world, what they call the military-industrial complex. And if you go against the military-industrial complex, I'm afraid there are very serious consequences for the politicians in power, whether they be in the United States or elsewhere in the world. I mean, somebody will find a bullet through the head. That is the way the politics at the highest level goes. So I don't know. I think it's good. It's a very dangerous world we are living in now, and to call for the strategic defeat of Russia is really something which I think requires much greater caution on the part of the developed world, especially the Western world, because it's not going to pan out that way. Their thinking is really, if Russia suffers a strategic defeat, then they are out of the equation and we can take on China.
And
India. No, I don't think India is really a player at that level. They know it. India is not really a player. India is not a threat to the United States. India is not a threat to China or to Russia or to anybody else, which is why today we are ideally placed in the G20 chair. The Indian policy is not going to be tilted against the US. It is not going to be tilted against Europe. But at the same time, it won't be tilted against Russia either. Right? So we are trying to work out a modus vivendi. But India is not a threat to them. India is certainly not a threat to the US. I think a good India-US relations have been building up, and they will continue to build up. And our interests align completely, as far as I told you in my opening statement, as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. There's a beautiful alignment of interests, and I don't think we can have any quarrels with that. It is actually the right way to go. There, I think that is the right moral way to go. But in the continental shelf, the behavior of the Western Bloc, I don't think that is the moral way to go, though they speak of it in terms of morality. And I think that is very dangerous, because morality really means, in their concept, you agree with us, you are moral. If you disagree with us, you are immoral. And I don't follow that concept. I think India is a very moral country. We have got thousands of years of history to prove it. And we follow that very basic scriptural concept as far as India is concerned, the spiritual and scriptural concept that, okay, all sentient beings have a right to live in this planet. And if we live together, we can have a better planet. Now, that is the Indian concept. And it is not that, okay, if I win, you have to lose. India stopped playing the game that I win, you lose. We can play win-win. And I think that is our policy. If we can play win-win, which is why we are not a threat to the other countries. My rising will not impact Russia. My rising will not impact the United States. I think my rising will only impact China because they want to take over a part of our country. But otherwise, I don't think India's rise is going to be treated as a threat by any country at all. And which is why I think, as far as the G20 presidency is concerned, whether anything comes out of it or not, I'm not sure. There are many challenges, but it is these challenges which provide us the opportunity. We can be the good broker. We can be the person who can say, okay, I'm not the judge sitting here, but I can be a facilitator to get both the parties on the table to talk amongst themselves and make your own decisions. India can't make those decisions. We don't have the power or the heft or to do it, but neither does any other country. But we have the goodwill. And I think that goodwill, if we can get people together to talk to each other, Will that make a difference? But I don't know. But I think that is the best way to go forward as of now.
So Russia is being opposed because it is the single biggest hindrance in the path of the West to conquer Asia, because Russian-Chinese relationship is very special and Russian-Indian relationship is very special. So if Russia is controlled, then it's very easy for them to control China and then India, because the West is only takes the military as a vehicle. So if they have to enforce their policies on India, then they're going to first send the military, and then we have seen that in 1971 war. This is their policy. Like, there's a document which was just forwarded by Elon Musk, how the Americans work. He just tweeted it just now. So the thing is, if India is aspiring for peace, India is not a threat to anyone. That gives them a bigger opportunity to put pressure on India. The same thing they've done with African Union also. So if you remove the Russian resistance right now, then everyone else is at a play. Then for them, then it will go back to the 1945 world. So have you taken this scenario into account?
Actually, I look at it slightly differently. I don't think the Americans will be interested in using force all across the world. They'll be very particular about the countries they do choose. You see, so when they chose Iraq or they chose Afghanistan, there was a specific purpose behind it. I'm not sure whether they will choose Iran. That appears to be $1 million question. I hope they don't. But the question is, if they don't choose Iran, will Israel choose Iran? I mean, there are too many question marks there, because very frankly, in my own personal opinion, the biggest threat to India does not come from China or from terrorism or from anybody else. It really comes from an outbreak of hostilities in West Asia, which will impact on energy supplies. And if that gets impacted, I think then India is in very serious trouble. But having said that, what the West is really looking at, and they have been very successful in doing it in many parts of the world, is what is now popularly called, and it's not my phrase, but popularly called now, regime change operations through toolkits. Now, what the West will be looking for is not to go to war against India or China or something like that directly, because that will impact them very seriously. I think they will be looking at toolkit operations and regime change to install a regime there which will follow their interests, and that is something which they attempted in West Asia. I mean, when you see the color revolution which took place in West Africa and North, in the Wana region, West Africa and West Africa, North and in Asia, in North Africa and West Asia, that is the Wana region. These color revolutions were inspired by regime change operations. They succeeded somewhere, they didn't succeed elsewhere. But the whole aim was to get a regime there which would follow Western interests. The same thing happened in Ukraine. The 2004 color revolution which took place, I think they called it the Orange Revolution, was a Western-inspired revolution. And then when you come to 2014 and the Euromaidan protests, again, you throw out the government to put in somebody else who was more pliable. Now, these regime change operations, I think, are going to be a very serious threat to India, not a direct military confrontation. And I have seen elements of this taking part. The outcome of some of these, over the last 6 to 7 years, there has been a very serious attempt at this regime change operations in India by these same powers. And it is simply because Indian foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi is an independent foreign policy where you are looking at India's national interests. And they don't want that. They want you to look at their national interest and conform. Now, that is something which India is not prepared to do. We will look at our interests. So what does the West do now? The regime change operation, the toolkit operations. And I saw a visible manifestation of this when we talk in 2014, 2015, where a huge propaganda was built that churches are under attack, which was fake. I mean, but obviously it created a lot of disturbance at that time. And President Obama made a mention of it when he came to the Republic Day parade here. And then he made a similar mention when he went back home. Then we have these various other protests, on the the CAA protests, the farmers' protests, and a whole lot of things which were engineered and supported by external agencies, because the cost involved was something like, in hundreds of crores of rupees. So where is that funding and financing coming from? People just don't come up and give up their jobs and start sitting on the streets. It doesn't work that way. So this regime change operation is something which I think is of concern to India, which is a threat to India, but not the direct application of military power. That I don't think is going to happen. And I don't think the West would really be interested in that. They will be interested in India buying their weapons, etc., which we are doing to a very large extent. India is a big market. But to interfere militarily in us in the form of American forces or Western forces ganging up against India in a direct attack, no, I don't see that happening. Information war is a real thing. Economic tools being used is a real thing. And I think this is the way the world is changing now. I don't think the Americans see the necessity of really going to war. They will use other tools, and they will simply get a regime, or they will attempt to get a regime which is more favorably disposed to them and which will follow the bidding. Basically, you can have a pliable government in Delhi, and that is what they're looking for.
You mentioned about regime changing, because that's how the first rung of the West works. It's changing the regimes. And like recently, the reports came out that in the African Union, 17 countries are completely dependent on the French colonial masters. And in India also, there are not India, east of India, also there are many countries like Philippines who are completely dependent on the US aid. Completely. Pakistan is another example which is dependent on the American aid. And this is how many of the troubled spots in the world are maintained by the West to be troubled spots. And they will always be there because they serve a strategic interest. So if there is no conflict, then the American arms cannot be sold. So it is a very clear direct correlation there. India rising as a weapons manufacturing hub is a serious threat to the West, and where most of the Indian technologies are indigenous and developed in-house in India, including the drone tech, which India has excelled now even better than China in terms of software side. So the regime changing wars is a reality. We can see Brazil, we can see Peru, we can see countries like Mexico, where these wars are beginning to happen. And all these three countries are resisting. So if you look at India being the only country which is neutral today and a leader of the neutral world, which is called Global South, do you think that today's Indian growth story will be hampered by these regime changing operations which are happening all over the world, directly or indirectly affecting India?
Yes. And I think this is, in my view, this is currently the most potent threat which India is facing. They have the opportunity to, continuously make the country boil on communal lines. And suddenly a toolkit operation will come to say that Muslims in India are not safe. Or something else will come up, and please take it from me. We are in the month of, we've just started, we are on the 5th of March today. When we come to May, June of this year, I expect certain degrees of violence to take place in India to accentuate existing fault lines. And this will be helped by certain political groups in India who have not been able to get into power in the last two national elections. And they're very bitter about it. They want to get back to the hot seat. And I'm afraid that they will not be able to do so in 2024 also. So that will give the Narendra Modi government a 15 years run. And 15 years is a very long time. Now, the West has not really been able to carry out any of these operations against India. To align the Indian leadership, to kowtow to them, because you have a strong prime minister in the center. So there will be efforts made at regime change. You get a coalition of parties, you get a Rahul Gandhi or somebody there, and then when you tell them to stand, they'll stand, and tell them to sit, they'll sit, and they will do your bidding. Now, that is the sort of government they want here. Now, that is not going to happen, but attempts will be made towards that end. And I think that spells a danger for India. I see a period of volatility from now, which is going to become, which will peak sometime in January, February of next year, just before the elections are held in 2024. And the whole aim will be to build a consensus around removing the present government. It will look as if it is internal. You see, there'll be political parties from India which will be pushing the agenda. There'll be various NGOs within India which will be pushing that agenda. But the inspiration, the finances, and the whole, you can say the whole planning purposes, that will be from abroad. And they will have a very simple agenda. Just change the regime, get a government in India which is pliable and which will do what they want. As I said, it won't happen, but that will be the aim. You will see it playing out. It is not something, I'm not a soothsayer or something, but for me, the writing is on the wall. It is going to happen, but the fortunate thing is we know it's going to happen. So the government is prepared. The agencies are prepared, and we will take steps to see that the troublemakers don't really create the level of trouble which they desire to. That is something which I think we need to do to nip the evil in the bud. How successful we will be, that the coming months will tell. But those attempts are already in progress. And it is not just the West. Unfortunately, when we are looking at a situation like this, China comes on board, their interests align with the United States. On this issue, they align. So, it's a very complicated world. Different interests align at different places. Our interests, of course, align with Russia. I don't think Russian interests will be on those lines. Russia would prefer a stronger India. But even Russia would like India to import their weapons, because if India becomes totally weapons independent, then who buys Russian arms? So to that extent, you will find that Russia, China, and the West, they will have something common against India. Okay, we can't let these fellows get that far ahead. We have to stop them. Because if they get that far ahead, economically and militarily, then our economic interests are threatened. And there's one thing which the Americans have done very well. If their interests are threatened, well, they really go all out. It is, regardless of whichever political party it is, they will do anything, and I mean anything, to ensure that those economic interests which they are looking after are maintained. And they will go to any extent to do that.
Currently, they are running out of 155 millimeter shells right now. So they're working on that.
Okay.
So you said and I was smiling because I written a book called The Making of a Statesman. And in that book is from Mahabharata, and it is very instructive here, like you just said currently. Now, one question which comes there is that the toolkit you mentioned, and we forgot to mention the judiciary. You'll have to see the world operations, that wherever the democracy has won, and there the West has interfered through judiciary, is the history. Whether it's Ukraine, the democratically elected president who was removed by a judicial act on corruption. Pakistan has faced so many times, whenever they never agree to the American interests, their governments are changed. And we have seen that in other parts of the world, including Africa. So how judiciary is safe from this kind of toolkit operation, which is run by the agencies of the West?
You see, when we're looking at by judiciary, I'm only going to refer to the apex court. The rest doesn't matter. So when we're looking at the judiciary, the high courts at the state level and the lower level judiciary doesn't matter. It is the apex court. I think to a very large extent, the apex court is immune from foreign influences. The system has been set over so many years. It will be very difficult for the judiciary per se to be influenced by external factors. I don't think that is going to happen. But to say that pressure will not be applied, no. Pressure may be applied. I've got no doubts about that. Pressure will be applied. I think India's judiciary is strong enough, patriotic enough, and competent enough to hold their own, especially as far as the apex court is concerned. And I can say the same for many of the high courts too. The judges which we have got there at those levels, many of them are absolutely outstanding legal luminaries, and I don't think they will fall for any such pressures or tactics. Having said that, to state that attempts won't be made. No, that won't be correct. Attempts will be made. And I think the problem is going to be that attempts are going to be made by parties within India. And that is where the danger lies, because it is not going to be something which, say, a foreign agency is going to be telling our judges. It is our Indians, within the system, who will be actually hyping up certain issues. And how the judiciary negotiates it, I think, will be a test of the judiciary in the coming year.
See, the most of the Western agencies, everybody in the world loves Indians. Everybody. Indians means a peaceful person. Indian means a peaceful guy, a logical mind, a reasonable person. This is a general image of all the Indians. And this is a strength as well as weakness. How long, because India has two responsibilities. One is that to spread the culture of peace, which is yoga and other things. Another one is to not ensure the enemies of peace to interfere. For that, you need strength, military strength, or intelligence agencies you need a very strong government, which India already has. So those three things play an important role in projecting power in the world. The world doesn't understand peace talk without being backed by military. So how long will India be weakened when world is expecting India to stay strong and stand up?
You see, as far as the military is concerned, as an army officer, I can tell you, because I've seen the system now for, in fact, from my grandfather's time, which goes back to more than 130 years now. I beg your pardon. Post-independence, I think we had a very good opportunity to become self-sufficient as far as defense was concerned. We missed that opportunity, either by design or for whatever reason. I really don't know whether they were pressurized. I don't have any knowledge of that. But we missed that opportunity. I don't think now we are going to miss that opportunity. Very serious efforts are being made at indigenization. We cannot become a strong country without having a strong polity, that is one, a strong economy, that is two, and a reasonably strong military to ensure the first two. You see, a weak military will be prone to too many threats as far as India is concerned. And we will lose out on a strong polity, and we will lose out on a strong economy. So we need a strong economy, we need a strong polity, and then we need a military to back it, to back our national interests. Now, our national interest doesn't mean that we are going to go out and, wage wars against other countries. But it is going to be strong enough to ensure that other countries who wage war against us will have to face the consequences of such wars. That is as far as the military concept is concerned. But more importantly, I think, it is the intelligence agencies now which we have to pay a very great deal of attention to, especially with respect to information warfare. This toolkit brigade is really a part of information warfare. Something happened somewhere and it is magnified thousands of times by groups of people to make it viral, and a very petty incident becomes a national issue. Now, we can't afford to let that happen. That means we have to be on top of the job. That means when these toolkit operators start operating, we need to anticipate what they're going to do and put out the truth in real time, so that those false reports do not become viral. And it is not going to be an easy task, but I think today the Indian public is also up to it. The government receives a great deal of support from the common citizen. You see, the common citizen's life has changed considerably as far as India is concerned. You go to the villages, the housewife is, the water comes into her house. She's got a gas supply. Her cooking is simplified. The economy has improved. That the level of people, the number of people below the poverty level has gone down. The middle class is rising. So, things are not going badly for India despite 2 years of the COVID and despite the Ukraine war. We are still doing reasonably well. So to that extent, I don't think there is going to be a public displeasure, and the public is very supportive of the government as of now. So we need to maintain that momentum and see that these vociferous tendencies, these disruptive forces, they are not allowed to function. Now, people will, once you start putting some of them behind bars, people will say you're an intolerant country. Well, I've told many of them, you can view us with whichever lens we want, but our job is really to make India a stronger country and economically a viable country. We don't want to go the Pakistan way where they are bankrupt. And they're bankrupt really because of those policies. So India is not waging war against other countries, but I think India needs to be strong enough to prevent other countries from waging war against India. And the internal component, I think, is the most important one. Externally, I think we will handle both Pakistan and China. There is no problems. We will handle our maritime concerns also. Where I have a concern is internally, where these various NGO groups, they come, and these toolkit operators start getting together, and then they create a very vicious climate within this country to indicate that everything is going wrong. Whereas if you actually go to the ground, you find nothing happening and things are peaceful.
See, the thing is, like the American social media companies, they're under the US laws. And we are in a USA, so we are perfectly under the laws of United States. And these platforms carry a lot of public opinion shaping strengths with them. And we can see that many of these social media firms have been used by the agencies to create revolutions. Classical example is Myanmar, where a strong movement was raised on a Facebook group actually, and created in overthrowing the government, or tried to overthrow the government, which didn't happen eventually with India's support. Now, China doesn't use any of these platforms. Russia doesn't use any of these platforms. So only India is remaining, which is a very glaring target, achievable target to create a public dissension and create disinformation campaigns, which can actually transform into electoral defeat. So how does India take this fifth information, this is called information warfare, into account?
This I've written about this subject, I've spoken about this. This is exactly what I've been saying. This constitutes the biggest threat. I want to give you a very simple example. This happened, I think, last year on the cricket field. We were playing Pakistan and we lost the match. Now, suddenly, we have a very respectable Muslims in the Indian team, outstanding cricketers. And one of them did not perform well on that particular day. And there were thousands of tweets, on the social media condemning him and saying he lost deliberately because he's a Muslim. Now, all those tweets, when we actually trace them back, they originated from Pakistan. That is the power of the social media. Now, the question is, by the time you sort it out, 3, 4 days, 5 days have elapsed, and people get a very negative impression. So after that, you've already lost a great deal of goodwill. When people say, okay, just because he's a Muslim, he's being targeted, whereas there was no targeting carried out from within India. That targeting was a deliberate deliberate targeting by people within Pakistan who knew that something like this will be picked up. And it became viral within India after that. We put it down, but goodwill was lost. It created that source for a small period of time, that ill will between the communities, which India can't afford, India has got a very vibrant Muslim population who are doing exceedingly well in all fields. Now, we can't have incidences like this, by external powers trying to create that instability between the communities within India. The same thing happens with the Christians, when people start saying that, okay, the Christians are under threat or the Muslims are under threat. It doesn't work that way. The United States is famous, as far as if you go back to the Wild West, if somebody stole cattle, the ranchers would come up, they would all gallop together and hang that chap by the nearest tree. Now, if in India, somebody's trying to steal a cow and the villagers, they get together and they beat him up, well, actually, that is part of the system. Nobody likes theft of your property. It doesn't have any communal angle at all. And even that is condemned. That beating is certainly condemned. But the question is, it is not a communal issue. But people in the social media will make it a communal issue. And I'm afraid there are various groups within the US, specifically if you look at the Ford Foundation, if you look at the Rockefeller Foundation, if you look at what Mr. George Soros has publicly stated, that he's going to put $1 billion in India to carry out a regime change. He has made that a public statement. So that threat is real, that money will come in. How India addresses that problem is to be seen. But I'm certain that the Indian establishment is cognizant of the challenge ahead, and they will take appropriate measures to see that it does not get exacerbated and the correct picture is put to people within India and across the world.
So Pakistan is a non-entity in terms of global politics. Americans also don't respect much, but these kind of entities are used by the agencies, Western agencies, to put somebody else in check. It's like so even though a country is bankrupt, but they have enough funds to create disturbances. How does it is made possible? I think that analysis needs to be has to be done to identify the real enemy. Because if you don't understand the real enemy, you cannot find a war. You cannot fight a war. What do
See,
you think of that?
on Pakistan, I want to give one statement. Everybody says, and this is especially relevant to all the people who are viewing this particular show. President Musharraf, when after he had lost power and he took refuge in the United Kingdom, he was in London, and he was asked by a reporter, "Is Kashmir the main issue? And if Pakistan gets Kashmir, will your problems with India be over?" And Musharraf made a very, he made a statement which I have been stating all along. He said, Kashmir is not the issue between India and Pakistan. Even if we get Kashmir, our differences will remain. And he said, because if we were not different, why did we separate? It is really an ideological issue between Pakistan and India. They have an ideology which is different to the ideology which we follow. They have an ideology based on religion, whereas India has an ideology based on a civilizational concept where all people can live together. Now, Pakistan separated, they wanted a separate state for the Muslims. It is that ideological construct of theirs which has put them into their present scenario. Now, it's very surprisingly, the interests of both China and the United States and Europe converge on this particular issue to use Pakistan against India. And there's a total convergence of interest. So China is using Pakistan in its proxy war against India. And if the West wants to pressurize India, well, Pakistan is a very convenient tool to use so. However, the change which has taken place now is, I think Pakistan is on the verge of bankruptcy if they're not already bankrupt. And I have the feeling that they may not exist as a country for a very long time. There are too many internal fissures. I think Imran Khan was supposed to be arrested today, but basically there are problems on three particular levels. One is at the political level. I think that is the most serious issue which they are facing today. They don't have any level of political unity, and that disunity is so strong, it is creating civil movements within Pakistan, which will destroy that country. The second, of course, is the internal security situation, which is in a mess. And the third is the economic situation, which is in a mess. So the army, whether it moves in or not, is irrelevant. They cannot sort it out. The only way to sort out this problem is for the polity to get together and work in unison. That I don't see happening. So Pakistan is going to be, as it is in India, nobody talks of Pakistan. It's a dead issue. We have got different concerns. And in my various discussions, where Pakistanis were also on the panel, and very senior Pakistanis, mind you, not just anybody, one thing which came out from their talk was a level of helplessness, hopelessness. Okay, listen, where have we come to? And you could see it in their faces, you could see it in the dialogue, you could see it in their speech, that the Pakistan story is over. So as far as I'm concerned, the Pakistan story is over. They don't really form part of my discourse as far as India is concerned. We have larger interests here. And I think we need to be aware of what China is trying to do within this country and what the US and European powers are trying to do in this country. The Europe and America don't want to disintegrate India, but they want India to be in a subservient position. So long as India is subservient, they're quite happy to let a little bit of progress take place, but nothing more than that. So we have our concerns as far as the West is concerned. They don't want a strong, economic, vibrant India. Despite the fact that a strong, vibrant economic India is not a threat to them, but they feel that in the long term, economically, if India is strong, then the world will gravitate, the economic push will gravitate towards that side, and their own people may suffer. That is their concern. I don't think that will happen. We can actually play a win-win game by which Europe can win, the US can win, and India can win. But are they prepared to play that game? That again is the million-dollar question. I don't think they're prepared on those lines.
No, win-win is not in their psyche, Western psyche. Win-win is not. It's a win-lose. And Pakistan economy is less than the economy of the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. So it is the same size, and I don't know how they're maintaining themselves. But anyway, but thank you, General Katoch, for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure, and you bring so much wealth of information, plus with a conviction which is only we can expect only from the soldier. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.
All the very best. Good day.
Thank you.